Hey, welcome back to Mom's. When people first start using a serger, one of the hardest things is to get that tension set. You've got 4 different tension dials, 4 different threads, and they all work together, and a lot of times it's hard to figure out which one needs adjusting and even in which direction. So let's analyze a seam, and I'll show you how to tell what you need to do there. Now, I have set my serger up with 4 different colors of thread. Normally you use the same color unless you're doing something decorative, so that's why it's hard to tell which seam is what. But once you look at one with all different colors, it's a little bit easier just to tell by position. So I have set this up with all different colors. So let's just look at a seam, and then I'll show you what happens for each setting when it's either too high or too low. So let's start off by looking at what a good seam looks like. This is a well-balanced serger seam. There is no puckering. The back and the front meet right there at the edge of the fabric. It's well-balanced. Okay, and you can see how I've loaded the machine. The red thread is your left needle. The navy thread right here is your right needle. This gold thread is your upper looper, and the blue thread is your lower looper. So after you make a seam, pay attention to where these threads go. If you notice, the 2 seams here at the bottom go over the upper looper. There's gold in between here. So this is our goal. This is what we want, a perfectly balanced seam. So let's look at what happens when we don't get that. Now remember, you're going to adjust tension from left to right. So we start with the yellow knob or the left needle. And this is what's going to happen in both cases. This is a sample where that needle is too tight. Look at the good one and look at this one. You see, you can hardly see the red thread there. The gold is, since it's too tight, it's pulling so tightly into the fabric you can hardly see it. Okay? On the back you can't see it at all. It's too tight. It's also causing this waviness right here, and it's slightly curved. You can see it even made the fabric slightly curved. So that's how we know it's too tight. If you were using a thinner fabric, this waviness would be much more pronounced. Now here's what happens when that thread is too loose. You see, instead of seeing a seam right here or a straight line right here on the left hand side, you've got these ladder stitches. It's so loose that it can't even hold itself down. The next thread is pulling it over to the right. So if there's no straight line on your left, you know that that needle is not tight enough. And this is what it would look like on the back. That red thread is just all loopy. It's just going everywhere. So it needs to be tightened up. Next is going to be your right needle, which is the pink knob on your machine, or the second from the left. So in a perfect seam, this is the navy blue thread here. It's the second seam. Now on this one, the tension was too loose, so that's pretty obvious. It's all, that one seam is all loopy. When you look on the back, there's many loops. So a loose tension is pretty easy to spot. That seam is just going to be very loose and very loopy. Tight is a little bit harder to figure out which needle it is, but you can. Now one thing on either one of these, if you're getting a lot of thread breakage, that's too much tension. That could be too much tension too. Now on this one, you see the waviness that's caused by too tight a tension. When you look at the 2 threads, you can really kind of see that the one on the right, the navy blue one, it's hard to see because it's sunk into the fabric so much more than the one on the left. Another thing is, because it's tight, it is pulling the lower looper from the back over. You see this blue thread on the edge right here? That's being pulled because this is too tight. It's tightening down on the gold thread in turn, which is pulling the looper from the back around to the front. So this is too tight. this is too loose. Now on to our loopers. Let's look first at the upper looper, which is your green knob. It's the second from the end. So in our perfect sample, this thread is right here and it meets right in the middle. That's the first thing you're going to want to look for. Does it meet right on the top of my fabric? So now let's look at our samples. This one, if you see this gold thread, it is wrapped all the way around to the back. You see how it comes over here? That's too loose. It's not tight enough to hold it right here at the top, so it's being pulled all the way around. So this needs to be tightened up. Plus the loops are really flimsy, they don't hold. Now let's look at what happens when it's too tight. Here, and you can barely see the gold anymore. There's just a little bitty line of the gold thread, or your upper looper thread. This thread right here is being pulled from the back all the way around to here because this is too tight. So if your upper looper is pulling this back thread all the way over from the back, it's too tight and it needs to be loosened up. And now let's look at the very last one. The blue knob is your lower looper. Remember, this is what a perfect seam looks like. Now, this is where it's messed up. This one, the lower looper is too loose. And you see how loose these stitches are? It is being pulled all the way from the back, all the way around to the front. And it's just not even, it's not holding on at all. Now, this one is too tight. One thing you can look for is if it's breaking your looper thread, it's too tight. That's usually the problem there. Now on this one, the upper looper looks fine. It looks fine here, but when you turn it over, you see how the upper looper is being pulled too far down. Your threads are not meeting here at the edge. And actually, I tried tightening it right here. You see how far that got. When I got tight, if I tried to stay there for any length of time, even on an 8 setting, it broke my thread. So, too tight, it's going to be, this blue thread is too tight, so it is pulling the gold thread, which is the upper looper, around and to the back. So I would need to loosen the tension on my lower looper. So just to recap, when you thread your serger, you start here and you thread this direction. When you're checking your tension, you look first at this needle and you work your way this way. So check your left needle, then your right needle, and then look at your loopers, upper and lower. So I hope this helps you out getting your tension straight. It's really not that hard. All you have to do is turn the dials. It's just figuring out which thread you need to adjust. You will have to adjust your threads when you change a thread, when you use a different fabric. So don't be afraid of adjusting your tension. For the most part, in between the 3 and 5 is going to work for most fabrics and most normal threads. But if you decide to do something creative, don't hesitate about changing your tension. Now you know how to look at a sample and tell which one to adjust. Be sure and hit that like button and that subscribe button and come back here to Mom's to see me next time.